Welcome to the Weekend Spectator. My name is Grace Reilly, and I'm here with the one and only Paul Kengor, who is in the underground studio, Grove City College, back on my old stomping grounds. Paul, how are you?
Great and gracious Grace, I am doing just fine. Here at the Institute for Faith and Freedom, we have our great producer, the fabulous Don Wolf, and we are ready to roll.
Yes, I miss Dawn, and I heard you're snowed in there now.
Yeah, we didn't get a lot of snow, but we got a little bit, and it's going to be, it's colder. It's not like what you're feeling in Florida, for sure.
Yeah, that's why I moved to Florida right there. Avoid I'll never forget the treks that I had to take to class at Grove City College.
Oh, yeah.
Those mornings where you wake up and your car is snowed in. I remember 7 a.m. having to scrape the snow off my car, shovel it out, and get
Right.
up to class. There's really nothing worse than that. So the goal
Yeah.
is to avoid that for me, but unfortunately,
They call the parking lot Siberia, right? The students here call it Siberia.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's far away and
far away and
almost like
cold.
walking all the way up to the middle of nowhere to get your car. So
Right.
it's a whole different story. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so today we're going to be taking kind of a different approach with this episode. And we're going to be honoring and remembering some really important people. First being Ted Olson, the widower of Barbara Olson. Now, a piece was just written by Bob for the American Spectator. A really, really good tribute. But we're just going to be talking a bit about his life to start. So, Paul, if you want to introduce that. And tell the audience about who both he and Barbara are for people who don't know.
Yeah, it's quite a story, Grace. So, I mean, you could really begin at September 11th, 2001. And Barbara Olson, who's a great friend of the founder of our magazine, R.M. Material Jr., and Jean, Bob's wife. In fact, they met through Barbara Olson. Barbara Olson introduced them. And
Wow.
she was a well-known pundit, writer, wrote a book on the Clintons in the 1990s, got a lot of attention. She was on CNN. She was, a regular pundit, regular author, common face, mid-40s. She was becoming a regular as well on Bill Maher's HBO show, Politically Incorrect. I mean, that show goes far back, right? And to
Wow.
give you an idea of what she was like, she was a conservative who could sit down with Bill Maher and they could joke and they could laugh together and have a beer together. So she was getting ready to record the next episode of Politically Incorrect. She was supposed to fly out there on September 10th, 2001. September 10th, 2001. By the way, at that point, so she's already introduced Bob and Jean. She was the bridesmaid in their wedding. Her husband, Ted, who's a high-profile Washington attorney, Solicitor General for the Bush administration, he was best man in their wedding. So September 10th, 2001, she's going to fly out to LA. So Grace, she decides to reschedule her flight because Ted's birthday is September 11th. September 11th, 2001. She says, I'm going to surprise him. And when he wakes up in the morning, I'm going to be here. I'm going to give him a kiss on his birthday, right? So she reschedules her flight. It's Flight 77, American Airlines out of Dulles Airport. Now, Dulles Airport is in Northern Virginia. You take 66 West to get out that way. It's not Reagan National Airport, but where they live is closer to Reagan National Airport. That's like Arlington National Cemetery. The Pentagon is right there. She gets in the plane after she kisses Ted goodbye. It's about 8:30 in the morning. They fly west across Virginia, all the way through West Virginia, get to the bottom tip of Ohio, do a U-turn there. The plane is hijacked. So it's one of the planes that's hijacked that morning. We all think about the planes that were coming from Boston to LA that flew into the World Trade Center buildings. My neck of the woods, we think about Flight 93, which crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. That flight went right along Route 80 here in Grove City and right over my house when it did a U-turn over Cleveland. Went right over the top of the city of Pittsburgh and crashed near Latrobe, Pennsylvania. So Flight 77. She's on that flight with I think about 70 people altogether. I think it was a Boeing 757. By the way, 3 kids from inner city Washington, D.C. who had won a National Geographic Society competition. They're like 11 years, they're like elementary school kids, making their first, they're going on a special trip to explore the Channel Islands off the coast of Santa Barbara, making their first trip in an airplane. They're on there as well. Plane gets hijacked. They push Barbara, these kids, everybody to the back of the plane. She calls Ted a few minutes after 9 a.m. By the way, there's not that many people with cell phones in those days, right? But she manages to get a hold of him as they're coming back eastward across West Virginia. She says, "We've been hijacked. We've been hijacked." And they're telling us that if we just cooperate, everything will be okay. I think the idea they're thinking at that point is we're going to be hostages. We're going to be ransomed, right? I guess this is what the reason that the hijackers were able to probably subdue everybody. They're just like, keep cool, no one will be hurt. Just take it easy. So they hang up the phone. Ted calls command center at the Department of Justice and says, the plane's been hijacked. Talk to them. And then he finds out that planes have been flown into the World Trade Center in New York. So he calls Barbara back. This is about 9:16 p.m. Tells her what's happened in New York. And there's just a pause, silence on the end of the phone, right? As she tries to imagine, okay, what does this mean? And I think it was at that point that Ted overheard another passenger of the passengers saying, "We're flying eastward. We're heading back toward DC." So about 11 minutes after that phone call, they hang up. I think it's around 9:27, 9:30, 9:36. That airplane comes soaring back toward the Pentagon. And people who were witnesses, Grace, I mean, this plane was moving so fast. I mean, at that point, you might have thought it's on its descent. I've seen this a million times in Old Town Alexandria, where offices are, in American Spectator, Arlington, that whole area. The plane started descent down toward to Reagan National Airport. And when you're descending, you're going, what, maybe 200 miles an hour, 130, something like that. This plane is doing 530 miles an hour. So people said they described what looked almost like a white flash. It dusts over Arlington National Cemetery and explodes into a fireball in the Pentagon, hits the west side of the Pentagon. I was there last weekend speaking at Young America's Foundation event at the Crystal Gateway Marriott in Arlington. I drove right by the Pentagon. My GPS kind of I got lost a little bit, and I just stopped there and I was trying to imagine that plane flying in and hitting that Pentagon. So Barbara lost her life that day on Ted's birthday. And Bob Terrell and Jean, of course, were just mortified when they found out that one of the passengers on board was Barbara. And American Spectator immediately created an award in her honor. So it's the Barbara Olson Award, for courageous journalism, which at our last gala, you were there, was given to Lila Rose.
Yeah, I remember.
She's the most recent recipient of it. I tell this story now only because Ted Olson died. He died last week. I guess it would have been, well, we're recording this now, I guess it would have been the week before last. Bob wrote a nice little tribute to him at the American Spectator, but died 23 years after the death of his beloved, sweet wife, who stayed home just to give him a kiss on the morning of his birthday, September 11th, 2001, and lost her life because of that decision. That's so funny. He spent the last 23 years of his life living that. I think he was in his mid 80s, maybe 84 years old when he died. And I got to tell you, I didn't really know him personally. Bob was obviously saddened by the news. Jean was. For me, I think of it as, this man's finally reunited with that, lovely, sweet lady who gave him a kiss goodbye 23 years. Yeah, he left kids behind. So it's, it's a sad moment for them too. But, reunited with her at last. Ted Olson, rest in peace.
Yeah, and that's exactly what to focus on and think about that. Yeah, for believers, I mean, to die is to gain, and to be that, and I'm sure, to be back with his wife is pretty amazing. So in the following years, in the years following his wife's passing, how close did he stay with the American Spectator and Bob?
Yeah, very close. So, I mean, every year we named a Barbara Olson winner for the Barbara Olson Award, and Ted would approve of those, and was always honored by that. Happy that his wife was honored in that way, and he and Bob and Jean remain close friends. So he was very close to the magazine, good friend of the magazine, very close friend of the founder. Again, his wife introduced Bob and Jean, of all things, bridesmaid in their wedding, of all things. That's
Amazing.
one of the people who died the morning of September 11th on Flight 77. Very sad.
Well, it's absolutely devastating, but stories like these are so important to keep telling, and I'm glad you told the story. I especially think for people my age who weren't alive, I wasn't alive, I was in the womb when this happened. So it was right before I was born, but
Wow.
I think that our nations, the younger generations are definitely, they don't have the same memory of it as many of you listening do. So I think just, keeping these stories alive and talking about, our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, our fellow Americans who were impacted that day is so important. And I know people who lost parents that day, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about it on the podcast too, about how the left has called other things the nation's darkest day. And how can you call anything else like January 6th the nation's
Right.
darkest day when we have so many more stories, like 3,000 more stories, just like what you just described?
Yeah, in fact, they compared the January 6 people to 9/11 hijackers. In fact, they wrote a piece on that for American Spectator at the time, a few days after January 6, 2021. And I remember Kamala Harris during the campaign was referring to January 6 as the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War, or something like that, right?
The
I mean,
worst.
really, 9/11, Pearl Harbor, all the, or that just shows how sick. And speaking of the younger generation, I'm teaching my Middle East politics course right now at Grove City College, which you've taken before, and when you were here, and right now we just happen to be talking about Afghanistan and the Taliban. And so I taught the class, I talked to the class just this past week about 9/11, what happened that morning, and everyone in that class was born after 2001,
Yeah.
and they had not heard of Flight 77. Now, they knew of Flight 93 because we're a college in Western PA. A lot of them have been to the Shanksville site. They knew about, of course, the Twin Towers. And I didn't ask. I should have said, how many of you know that a plane crashed into the Pentagon? It would have been interesting to even ask that. But they certainly didn't know, the story that I just shared with you right now.
Yeah, and comments like that from Kamala Harris, I would endorse bringing cancel culture back for that. I mean,
Right,
come
right, right.
on, which
Yeah.
America did do, but I mean, that's just the most absurd, offensive thing she probably could say. I mean, it's
And a
awful.
bunch of them said it. In fact, if you could put it up on the screen, if you could find it, I wrote a piece, like I said, January 2021, and I quote a whole bunch of liberals comparing it to Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass in Nazi Germany, comparing it to Pearl Harbor, comparing it to 9/11. I quote Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and I thought, what are these people doing? I mean, are we that far removed from 9/11 that, and there's no excuse for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and people like that. I mean, to compare it to that, I mean, condemn January 6th and the people
Yeah.
who banged on the side of the building, but good grief, I mean, to
Well,
compare them to the Osama bin Laden, hijackers, are you out of your mind?
they are out of
That's
their
sick.
minds. That's the only
Yeah,
explanation. I mean, there's really no excuse other than that. And this also reminds me, so about a month or two ago, I went to a Nine Line Apparel foundation. So that's a veteran-owned company, and they do work to help veterans. So they held a fundraiser dinner, basically to help give wounded veterans homes. So it was a really great cause. But at this, I was able to sit next to Bernie Carrick. Now, if any of you know who that is, he was the police commissioner of New York City during 9/11.
right.
And so he's a hero, a hero. And I had heard him speak when I was in high school at a Turning Point USA conference.
Hmm.
So years ago, I want to say 2018. I heard him speak. And I had followed along with him since because as a young person, I learned, this is a hero and someone who really played an important role on such a dark day in our history. So it was really cool a few months ago to be able to sit next to him at a dinner and
Yeah.
talk to him a bit more. Uh,
Oh, his
but
stories. Whew,
but
imagine.
that's the thing. I mean, and we have heroes like that walking among us still. I mean,
Right.
and
Right.
it's the same thing too with veterans, where I hope the younger generations appreciate all of these people.
Yeah, no, I mean, what those people the morning of 9/11, I mean, they're like wartime victims. I mean, imagine driving along, Route 1 in Arlington or George Washington Parkway or 395 or whatever that morning, rush hour, 8:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., and just seeing that. I mean, it's just
Can't even
unbelievable.
imagine.
Imagine, yeah, imagine carrying a briefcase or your purse walking through Manhattan, and I mean, could you imagine the noise and the sound and the explosion and then standing there watching people jump out of 50, 60th floor in the World Trade Center building, leaping to their deaths. I mean, just horrific.
I
And then
know.
again, not to rub in the point, but this is why it's so obnoxious and obscene what they're doing. For liberals to try to compare the January 6 people to this, I mean, you people got a problem. You're really messed up. All right.
It's great.
There's no comparison to that. No comparison.
No, none at all. It's completely deranged and yeah, I mean, and we can still hope yeah. I'm actually yeah, there's really nothing more to say. It is deranged, but I guess we can
Right.
switch gears now. But that really was a wonderful story. Well, it's not a wonderful story, but I'm glad that you were able to share that from his life.
Sure.
And just that the American Spectator has been able to honor both of them all of these years,
Right.
and all of the incredible work that Barbara's done and Ted alike. But we also wanted to talk today about Richard V. Allen, who is a very important Reagan advisor. He passed away this week, and you have a piece that is out now. It should be out now by the time we release this episode honoring him.
Yeah. Yeah. So Richard V. Allen died this past week. I think he was 88 years old, I believe, upper 80s. And it's so cool, Grace. The phrase, right, that everybody knows about Reagan. Well, my idea of policy toward the Soviet Union is simple. We win, they lose. What do you think of that? Now, the full quote, Grace, all right, here it is. Dick, my idea of foreign policy toward the Soviet Union is very simple. We win, they lose. What do you say of that? That phrase was told to Dick Allen, Richard V. Allen.
Oh,
Allen is the source of that quote. And it was January 1977, end of January 1977. Jimmy Carter had been inaugurated president, about to launch the 4 worst years in American history for almost any president. All right, arguably among the 4 worst years of any presidency. And people watching now, like, well, Biden, Obama, Herbert Hoover, we could have an argument about this. All right, put it this way, he's at least in the bottom 3 or 4 or 5 for sure. And so Allen, who's only 41 years old, already really accomplished, worked at CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is where I first worked in the early 1990s, when I was getting my master's degree at American University. He's like 41 years old, worked for Richard Nixon, worked for the Hoover Institution. He's going to run for governor of New Jersey. So he flies out to meet with Governor Reagan to get his endorsement. And they start talking about foreign policy. And as Dick Allen said, we talked and talked and talked for about 4 hours. And then finally, Reagan said that, Dick, what do you think about this? We win and they lose. And Allen said, are you serious about that? And Reagan said, absolutely. I wouldn't have said it if I don't believe that. And Allen at that
good
point,
point. It's a good
yeah,
strategy.
and Allen at that point, who had worked for the Nixon administration, by the way, their policy wasn't to win the Cold War, but to have peace with the Soviets, right? Détente, we accept the Soviets have Eastern Europe, Western Europe, those are our allies. Reagan said, no, that's immoral. That sells Eastern Europe down the river, the people of Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. We need to reverse communism. We need to win the Cold War. And so Allen said, if you're really serious about that, I'm in. I'm in. And Reagan said, all right, then join me, right? Join me in this, crusade to defeat Soviet communism. So at that moment, Dick Allen dropped his bid to be governor of New Jersey. and joined up with Reagan. And in the article, I talk about another moment that Alan had. So it was Alan, Reagan, and Peter Hannaford, another friend of the American Spectator, and Bob Terrell, and their three wives, Nancy Reagan included. They all go to Western Eastern Europe. Alan arranged this. It was November 1978. Alan takes Reagan to the Berlin Wall for the first time. And I tell the story in the article, quoting Alan at great length. And Alan talks about taking him there, what they see at the wall. And Reagan looks at it and says, "This is an outrage. Dick, we've got to find a way to knock this thing down, And then
And
one more story. So Alan is with Reagan in June 1979 when the Pope goes to Poland. And they're sitting there watching TV, just the two of them. And Reagan sees this massive crowd greeting the Pope. And Alan said, "I looked over and there were tears in Reagan's eyes." And Reagan said, "Dick, that's it. We've got to find a way to get elected and reach out to this new Polish Pope in the Vatican and make them an ally. And so he was witnesses to all three of those things. Reagan wins in 1980, defeated Jimmy Carter, won 44 out of 50 states. And then Alan became Reagan's first national security advisor. Now, this is kind of bittersweet. He only lasted less than a year. He got run out of Washington on an ethics charge, and it had to do with something that is just really ridiculous. I mean, completely ridiculous. Fortunately, he was replaced by Bill Clark, the judge, William P. Clark, who I became very close to. I became his biographer. And there was really Bill Clark, all of 1982, most of 1983, that laid the strategy to take down and reverse Soviet communism and win the Cold War. And frankly, probably, well, we would have never known what would have happened if Alan had stayed in. But I think it was Clark and Reagan that talked about the DP, the Divine Plan. And I think the Divine Plan called for that to happen. Interesting Divine Plan take. Robert Orlando and I, we did the documentary, The Divine Plan, the book, The Divine Plan, and we tracked down Richard V. Allen. And this was a stroke of the DP. Allen just happened to be in New Jersey right when I emailed him after not being in touch with him for years. And I said, "Well, Rob is there right now. Can I put you in touch?" He said, "Yes." Rob connected him. He was at a beach house like a half an hour from Rob. Rob said, "I can be there tomorrow," right? Rob grabs his equipment, everything, goes out there, got him on video. So we have Dick Allen talking on video about these episodes. Knock that wall down. We win, they lose. That's it. The Pope is the key. The Pope is the key. The Pope is the key. So he was, as I say in the column, a great witness to what Reagan did in the end of the Cold War and the Cold War victory.
Wow, that's amazing. And that answered, I was going to ask if you had been able to spend much time with him, because I know you have with many of just the people who were close to Reagan, including Bill Clark, who we've talked about
Yeah.
on this show, especially as the movie came out. But that is a really cool story. And I mean, to have him be a focus in the documentary, and definitely check out the piece at spectator.org to read those quotes that you mentioned. I mean, at length, and just the piece honoring him. Another really cool story.
Yeah, great story. That one has a happy ending, unlike the Ted Olson story, right? So this one ends in victory. And I never actually met Dick Allen in person, but I emailed with him, talked over the phone. Did I ever meet him? I don't think I ever met him in person. Rob got to, fortunately. Now, Bill Clark was like a grandfather to me. I was with Bill, 1,000 times. But yeah, it's good to stop and remember. I mean, week to week, we do these shows and we talk about politics and what's going on today. But the American Spectator is about remembering our friends too, remembering history, remembering these important events that happened in the 1980s when Bob Terrell and the American Spectator, they were close to Richard Allen. They were close to Bill Clark. They were close to Richard Pipes, Bill Casey. Bill Casey, Bob Terrell was at Bill Casey's funeral when Casey died. He was close to the American Spectator. So these were the guys that won the Cold War.
Yeah, no, very well said and a wonderful note to end on. I'm glad that we were able to cover both of these. And everyone watching, make sure that you go to spectator.org and subscribe if you haven't. It keeps the American Spectator going, supports us, and also just includes great pieces on a lot of the things that we talk about on these episodes in a lot more detail. So we don't hit everything so that you can find out more when you read about it, but especially these two pieces are worth reading and diving into as we just honor these souls. But thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Make sure that you like this, share it with your friends, and in any way that you can. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Grazie, Grace. We will see you again next week.